Welcome back to Software Without Borders, where we explore the ever-evolving world of software and its impact on businesses and industries worldwide. I'm your co-host, Andy Hilliard, CEO of Accelerance, and with me today is my co-host, Rich Wanden, Chief Customer Success Officer at Accelerance.
Very good. Look, Andy, thanks so much for having me here today. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm also thrilled that we've got Mark Orttung here with us today. And for those of you, of course, who may not know Mark, he's a very seasoned software executive, deep expertise in Agile development, business acceleration, growing businesses, and scaling software development. So with that sort of focus in the business that he has and the experience he has on innovation and customer value, Mark's been constantly driving successes with dynamic and challenging software environments.
Yeah, for sure.
Great
Mark,
to have you.
Yeah, thanks. Mark, we're super excited to hear your insights on navigating the challenges of modern software development. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Very good. Excellent. Hey, I usually like to start off by just like a journey question, get a little bit of insight into who you are, Mark, and how your career evolved over time. You've held leadership roles in companies like ProjectWorks and Provoke Solutions, Nexient, and Bill.com. Can you share a little bit of insight into your journey into software leadership and process consulting, and maybe what led you to specialize in these areas?
Yeah, absolutely. I've kind of bounced back and forth between consulting about software and being in software firms. But I think the through line for my whole career is you could look at Jeffrey Moore's technology adoption curve. And, I've always just been really interested in how technology is applied and how new technologies are adopted by the market. So my time in the very beginning, I was at what became Accenture. And I worked there in a lot of their early technology groups, trying to help large Fortune 500 companies adopt early technologies. From there, I got the bug to go do software startups. And so I went and I did one called Genesis. We were old school licensed software that we shipped. A lot of our software, frankly, sat on the shelf, which gave me the bug to go try SaaS because it felt like a better alignment of what the buyers really wanted and what we were selling, and a better feedback loop to say, is anybody out there? Is anybody using this? Does the software work for you? SaaS, you learn because they'll go away if it doesn't work for them. So then I did a series of 3 SaaS companies. One called Get There, which was corporate travel. One called Reardon Commerce, which was corporate services procurement. And then Bill.com, which was small business finance. And then I took a turn again and went back into consulting and ran Nexient, where we built software for Fortune 500 enterprises, which I thought sort of Bill.com doing small business finance and going to market to SMBs, and Nexient, which was software development for large companies and running a services company, were kind of unrelated. And then we sold Nexient in 2021, and I was trying to look around at what to do next. And I bumped into the founders of ProjectWorks, which is SaaS software for running a small mid-market consultancy. So while I was at Nexient, there was a real challenge. I couldn't find good software to run the firm on. And when I met the founders of ProjectWorks, I loved the product they had and the team that they had built. And so I joined the board. And then a few years later, I've now joined as CEO. So I'm having fun. It kind of puts a lot of things together throughout my career, both the consulting side and the software side in one place. So it's a lot of fun. I'm having fun. And it's, we're back to the early stage of the technology adoption curve and looking to create something new.
Well, before we go down that path, the way you laid out your journey sounds very logical and somewhat linear. I always like to delve into I'm sure as a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old, you didn't have this all laid out in front of you. What epiphany did you have, or what happenstance or, chance meeting or tell me a little bit about what got you down this path. Obviously you and I and Rich both were born before the age of the internet. So just I always like to hear stories about how you got on this track. Now, it's been a great track, obviously, but how did you get on the track?
Yeah. Well, probably all the way back to college, I started out studying math. And one day, and so it's sort of I was going down a math major, and I realized one day that there were like no more numbers left in my classes. As you get into the higher math, it gets weirder and weirder, and the people get weirder and weirder too in your classes. And so I took a computer science course, and I was like, "Wow, this is a lot more fun." And there's something about it just kind of lit up for me, right? Like the interest level. So I ended up with a math and computer science major, and back then, that was still a little bit weird. Like, it was a while ago, and now everybody knows it. But back then, it was a bit weird. And going into startups and software was a bit unusual back then. So it was, I don't know, something about it just really was fun for me and attracted me to the software side. So
that's really cool. I mean, my story is different, and I'm not going to go into it because then I'm going to just talk. And but anyway. You were just Project Works, and you've emphasized before the importance of building products that people love to use. So can you sort of dimensionalize this for me, the philosophy that translates into that approach to software development leadership, and has that always been a thread in the different places you've been? Is that a mantra of yours? Is that a personal philosophy? Is that
it is?
Is something?
Yeah. One of the partners in the Anderson Consulting, which became Accenture practice way back when I got started, was really passionate about user experience and really trying to deeply understand the journey that the users of whatever software you're building go on, and trying to get in their head and trying to make the software anticipate their next step and just make it really easy. So that has been my whole career, something that's kind of driven me. And it's really a first principle, right? If you look at what people are trying to do and help them do it and take steps out of it, take time out of it for them, it's valuable and they love it, right? And so that tends to drive things like your value proposition and whether people are going to buy it. But at the core of it is, are you making their life easier? Do they love doing it? Does it take some mundane thing out of their task or allow them to do something completely new in a way that is easy? So that's always important.
Do you feel that this is a either and a competitive differentiation, or something that other firms and leaders don't define or take seriously enough?
I think the latter. I think it's really hard work actually to really deeply understand your end users, and that's one of the things that I'm excited about with Project Works is it's very vertically focused, and I feel like I got to do 9 years of customer research by running a services firm, and so I have this visceral reaction. Like when my team shows me a demo and the data in the demo shows the projects, with bad margin, I get this like pit in my stomach, because having run a services company and you look at a project and you see it's going sideways, you just get this feeling. So like I feel like I've got a sense for what somebody running a consultancy or an engineering firm or an architecture firm would be thinking about when they look at this software and how they're looking at their own firm.
Well, let me pick up something there, because you've had decades of experience. When you started out building software, I imagine it was all pretty much a waterfall world.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
And when did the Agile thing hit you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it's funny. When I was at Bill.com, we did a lot of the Agile things, but we were not formally Agile at all. So we didn't have the ceremonies, but we would debate, should we release every week or every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks? And we would experiment with it. We landed at about once a week for us was the right thing. And we were always sort of trading off like how much testing and regression versus how much code versus how much risk do we introduce by coding for too long, and then you try to push it all live and something breaks. And so we landed at about once a week. But the place where it really became formalized for me was Nexient. The team that had created Nexient was really early and very, and they bought into Agile in a really big way. And we were really there as practitioners of it. We were never set up to be coaches or Agile transformation consultants, but we would get companies hiring us to do that. And they would, and I would try to like convince them not to hire us to do that. I'd say like, no, we're practitioners. We build software using Agile. We don't teach you how to use Agile. And a couple of them would actually insist and say, because you don't teach others how to do it, but because you do it all the time, we want you to be our coaches. We want practitioners. We want people who live it. So one of the firms that convinced us to do that it's a Fortune 50 logistics company. And so they did this launch with their IT group, and it was their IT leaders. I think everybody was a VP and above, and they rented out a small college in New Jersey like this. And I went and did this talk. It was about 250 people. It was just their leadership team. And they were releasing software twice a year as a company, Fortune 50. And one of the best accomplishments we had is I think we got them to somewhere around 400 or 500 releases a year through a whole series of, lots of different small steps we took along the way to get them to have the right processes and the right confidence to do that. But just, if you think about it, if you're that big and you can only release twice a year, you just can't do that much. And when you do release, it's got to be terrifying, right? But if you can do 400 or 500 a year, then you can do all kinds of small adjustments and be much more responsive to the market. And so that was one of the things that I was most proud of there, is that even though we didn't set out to be Agile transformation consultants, we wound up doing it for this very, very large company.
Well, that's interesting because, Olivier Piard, who works with us here at Accelerance, he often will say to people, the challenge is Agile is a mindset first. And you're walking into an organization that doesn't have that mindset. You can't do personality transplants, but how do you get them from 2 to 500 or 300 releases a year? What does that curve look like? I can't imagine it's exponential. It come that way, but
we everything we did, we sort of did in an Agile-like way. So in that case, we would start small. We started out with one coach who had maybe 3 or 4 teams he was trying to influence, and so we were which in their world was a rounding error, as just a tiny little experiment. But we got those 3 or 4 teams to be much more productive. And they were also really good at giving us access to the executives for whom those teams worked. So they were on the journey too. And that was really critical. And so we got one coach, 3 or 4 teams, and over a quarter or two, we showed some really compelling results in terms of them changing how much they could produce and the quality of what they produced. So then they just started scaling. They added another coach, 3 or 4 more teams, and we were sort of graduating the teams, and then we just kind of kept scaling it until they came back and asked us to make it an enterprise program. And so by the end, we probably had 7 or 8 coaches working, and we were running teams through, and we ultimately ran most of their IT teams through this program. It was. Yeah. And again, we were a bunch of software nerds who were happiest making software, not like coaching and teaching. And so it was an interesting thing.
So you were leading by example, and they were picking it up and running with it because they could see it working.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's a great story. And it's always interesting to hear really good examples of how you put those things together. But yes.
So let me continue down that same path as far as with Nexient. You grew Nexient from like 35 million to over 130 million in revenue.
Yeah.
And so that was massive scaling in a relatively short period of time. So how did you stay true to building great products that people love, delivering great services that people love and appreciate, and at the same time scale so quickly? How did you maintain that focus and also deal with the inevitable challenges?
Yeah, that in a way they actually complemented each other, because when I arrived, like our website had 50 things that we claimed we did, and we were 200 or 300 people. And you kind of look at it, and if you knew how many people we had, it's like there's no way you could possibly do any of these things well if you do this many things. So we went through this relatively terrifying process of trying to really zero in on this is what we do, and we don't do any of these other things. And so we landed on software that people love to use, and we got to this like life's too short for crappy software kind of mantra. But what it meant was we had to say no to a lot of consulting engagements that were not. So people would come to us and say, can can you roll out SharePoint for us? And that, and when you're a small, scrappy consulting firm, you want to say yes, because it's revenue, it's probably pretty good margin. And we had to say no to all that and say, all we're going to do is build software, and we're going to add in user experience team, and we're going to add in a product management team, so that we're not giving you engineers, we're giving you a product team. So we were sort of, part of the idea was we're trying to bottle up the way a startup would work and sell that as a service. So sell you a team. And now it's pretty common, a sort of a squad that has, an agile team with product, with user experience, with architect and engineer and quality, and put it together. But back in 2014, that was not that common to be sold as a service. And so just actually saying this is all we're going to do led to more growth, because people started to identify us with being the people who just do that, and we got, I guess, pretty good at it. And it just, I think also it comes back to that Jeffrey Moore curve, where the market for what we were doing was growing rapidly at the point where we were just barely ahead of it. So, which is what you really want to try to do, is find that market wave and surf it. And, I think we got very lucky that we sold in 2021, because I think that, and for me, one of the signs that the market was the way it was going to crest was that all the large strategics were buying people like us, like firms like Nexient. And so that to me meant that we'd hit the mainstream part of the market. And if, Accenture and all the top 10 buy my competitors, then I'm going to really struggle to compete against them, as it's in the mainstream market. So that was part of why we were open to selling at the time we did, is we felt like the market curve was cresting, and you have to reinvent yourself to find the next market curve or exit.
For sure. I think every leader will probably say you have to say no to a lot of things in order to focus what you're going to do. Much easier said than done, I think. And tell me if I'm wrong about this, but in order to actually take that leap from saying it to doing it and living it, you need to, it would be preferable to have some sort of not only definition, but traction of what you really want to go after. Even a definition isn't enough. You need to know that you can say no, because I think a lot of companies get trapped into they just don't have enough traction in what they want to pursue in order to just break off that relationship with saying yes to everything. Would that be true?
Absolutely. It's, if you, just thinking back when we first got into this and we came up with this, Life's Too Short for Crappy Software, that if you're a lifelong consultant, you've got this urge to just ask people what their challenges are and try to understand what they need, and then say, of course, you can offer that, right? And I remember the very first meeting where we had a new prospect coming into our delivery center, and we decided to test out this concept. So the first slide we put up just said, "Life's too short for crappy software." And that was all that was on it. And I got up and just said that, this is why we're here. This is what we do. And we had no idea if they were going to walk out, or if it was going to be that's not what we need. And at the end of the meeting, they ended up hiring us and then became a 10 million a year plus client. But they, at the end of the meeting, they said, part of why we're hiring you is because we've talked to 10 firms. You're the only ones that seem this committed to it. And so it was why we were winning, but also quite terrifying, because we didn't know. And you do have some that hear it and they're like, that's not what we're looking for. And so, but in the long run, it was better, the focus.
So, one of the things you pointed out to me, and I've heard this many times, and that is, a firm has to make a transition from being sort of a sub $25 million firm to a more than 25 million, maybe between 25 and 40 million is when a firm really changes it in terms of dependency on a single leader or a personality per se, and then you're needing to build in some continuity, some redundancy, some and different functions take on different roles. Sometimes they used to be outside, but now they're internal. Can you sort of tell me how that went with you and Nexient and how companies can avoid that pitfall?
Yeah. I took over Nexient from Neeraj Gupta, who had founded it. He had also founded Servant Ventures, and that got going well enough that he needed to go spend full time on that. So I came in. The year I joined, we were about 39 million. First thing I realized is that everything went through Neeraj, and he's spectacular, right? And so that was great. But I was like, I don't have the bandwidth that he did, and B, I don't want to be the guy that's literally in the middle of every presentation. Like, it just doesn't seem like we're ever going to get past this. So I think part of how we made the change was by switching people, and I came in with beginner's eyes and sort of a fresh look. I was more willing to experiment with it, and it was I joined at the end of 2014, and I took us over 3 years from 39 million to 34 million. I think in 2016 we did 34 million, and it was because I was experimenting, trying to figure out how to scale so that I wasn't in the middle of everything. And what it meant was we needed to hire effectively 4 or 5 leaders who could run a part of the firm and try to decentralize everything that we did. And so because I had started at what became Accenture, I had their model in my head. And so I was trying to run that playbook. And what they had was these client partners who came up through, they were practitioners. They came up either building software, designing software, something like that. And they were open to selling, which is a very hard skill set to find in the same human being. So I went out and it took me 3 years to find the right people to come in and run a bunch of clients or run a whole region with that skill set. But in the end, we wound up with 5 general managers who each ran a region, each of which was 25 to 30 million. And so effectively, what I think I did very simply was I took what was Neeraj and made it into 5 people that could each scale to 25 or 30. And that was another thing as we were approaching 130 million, I was trying to figure out, okay, maybe I can just get 3 more and we can get to 100, 180, 200 million. But this is also going to break. And what's the next wave? How do I, because I think there's another wall somewhere around 125 or 150 million, and you got to reinvent your model again. And so I was.
Were you having any doubts when you started and you were experimenting and you were relatively flat to slightly down?
Oh yeah, there were. I mean, I was constantly having doubts, but I guess one of my personal traits, I'm very persistent. And I just kind of kept at it, but yeah, there were definitely moments where the board and I were not at all sure that this was going the right way, right? We were literally going the wrong way. And the company before I got there had grown on a pretty nice straight line up. And so it didn't look good.
What happened? What break?
I think it was 2 or 3 things coming together at once. One, we got the focus and got this idea of focusing in on the core software team as what we're going to sell. And 2, I got the right go-to-market team. So I had enough people with the sort of Accenture or Accenture-like experience where they were practitioners who could sell and kind of really help us grow our client base. So the combination, you can only get away with that differentiation if your go-to-market team can position it and defend it. Because most of our buyers would come to us and want staff augmentation. And we had to do a challenger sales process to get them to believe that it was better to let us have a team that owned a part of their whatever it was they were trying to build. That took a fairly sophisticated set of people running the accounts to do that. And so without the pair of those 2 things, it didn't work. And that's what took about 2.5, 3 years to get all that in place. So yeah, it was a journey. And then from there, it was fun. Although when you shrink a company for 2.5 years, you kind of have PTSD. You always think you're about to do the same, right? And so even though we grew about 40% 5 years in a row, even on year 4, I was never confident that it might just not just fall off again, right? You just had that sort of
So true. So true.
Mm-hmm. But you must have, as part of doing all of that, even so, you've got your go-to-market people out there. You've got to scale all the teams underneath. You've changed the whole way your business ran as well because of the scale of that, right? You've been scaling the whole delivery process as well. How did that work out?
Yeah, we kind of lived the Agile stuff. So we would do retros on the company every 2 to 4 weeks. So everything we did, because we were just used to doing retros as part of our client work. So we would do it on ourselves. And so the other thing I always talk about is differentiation. It's go to market. And I called it 1,000 little things. Like there were just all kinds of points of friction in our business. And we would learn about them one at a time through retros. And the team was really, they bought into just identifying them and fixing them. So we would adjust little things along the way. And over time, it really added up to an efficient group that could, we spent a lot of time on building an intentional culture as well. We wanted people who wanted to keep learning, and we wanted people who wanted to keep improving. And so as a group, I think we got pretty good at learning and improving, which all comes back from that Agile, sort of the mindset, as you said at the beginning, of Agile is something that the team really kind of took to heart and lived in the way we ran our own company, which is, I think, was one of the unusual things about Nexium. One of the things I've discovered, especially in my role at ProjectWorks, is that I think a lot of consultancies really focus on their clients, and they really never focus on themselves. They're just, shoemakers' children have terrible shoes, right? Like they want to be billable, they want to do client work, they want to do right by their clients, and that leads to them not doing enough on their own business. I don't know, have you guys seen that? That same sort of.
I always used to admire Andersons and Accenture for that. And some of the places I worked where they never invested, like places like CSC, where they never invested in the 2 weeks a year that you would get on how to be a better consultant practitioner, leading into what you're talking about, your go-to-market team. That was very that was the role I had at CSC, was basically the AGM for states. But it's a different thing. And what strikes me about things like Agile is there are so many people even now. There's, to me, there's a need for it, that if I said to you, look, pull up the Agile manifesto, and they'd look at me and say, what? This is like, first you got to kind of get that vibe of it all. And then you got to think about how to apply it. And do you actually, Andy and I were talking about this yesterday. I was saying, there's that Michael Gerber book from years ago. I can't even remember what it was, but the model was, you've got to work on the business as well as in the business. But if you're not working on it, you're never going to be able to scale. You just can't do it.
Yeah,
you're just going to fill another hour as a consultant. So
it's the same thing about saying no to things. I mean, I think those kind of go together. And I'm wondering, Mark, is this something where you need to create leadership and a function around internal continual improvement, knowing that if you don't do it, it'll never get done. It's always going to fall. People do what they want to do, and serving the customer and building the better product is what they have always wanted to do. This sort of self-improvement thing is not, it's always a second priority.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. I think one of the things we did at Nexium, and actually we've been doing it at ProjectWorks as well, is there's the Carol Dweck book, Mindset. I don't know if you guys have read that, but it's a good just kind of primer for getting people into this approach of your journey is whatever you choose to work on and learn, not like it's not inherent. It's like you can change who you are by just, anybody can pick up any skill if they're willing to put in enough time to do it. And so that's like a personal view. We sort of try to take that intentionally and map it to the company and say, we as a company can get good at anything if we put the time in and really work at it. And so we need to figure out what those things are. And that it just creates that mindset of trying to grow. I think it's critical. And it sounds, I remember when I was early in Nexium and somebody was talking to me about that, it sounded like kind of fluffy, not going to help my bottom line. Like, yeah, sure, kind of. I don't know. But I didn't really buy into it, to be honest, in the beginning. But I think looking back, it really was one of the drivers that allowed us to grow so much. Is that we did get a team that bought into, and it mostly was coming from the Agile mindset. I think that they really liked doing retros with their teams, and so that it made sense to them to do retros as a leadership team. And it was funny because they all had opinions. Their teams, one of the guys used to always joke about how all week long his developers would grumble at him about various things, and then he'd do the retro and they'd be quiet. So he'd write it down during the week and say, "You're complaining about this week, and you're complaining," and like getting them to actually do the retro in a meaningful way. So because they ran retros, they were great participants in them too.
Very good. Very good. And, just sort of thinking about this sort of need to be learning and all those sorts of things, we have the most wonderful opportunity before us. I don't think I've had one of these for like 10 years. Maybe it was when cloud came along and whatever that was, we had to figure out all of that sort of stuff. But the impact of AI on professional services firms is massive, right? I mean, what are you seeing?
Yeah, it's there's so many things that are fascinating about it. And actually, and I did a master's degree in AI back in the 90s, and my conclusion at the time was this isn't ready for prime time, but now it is. Yeah. So one of the themes I see, I would be worried if I was a very large consulting firm, because I think that the ones who are going to thrive are the small consulting firms who can really pivot to take advantage of the AI tools. And it's going to, some of the work will naturally lead to smaller teams, which is great if you're a small team. But if you have a team of 400,000 or 500,000 people, that's a real challenge. So I think so one of the things that I see is that, I don't know exactly how, but it will lead to more efficient teams and to smaller teams. And that was, as we drove our growth at Nexient, we were lucky that this wasn't the case yet. And so we would tune our go-to-market to sell things that led to very large projects, right? Like, so we had some offerings that if we really nailed it, we'd sell 2 people for 3 months. And other offerings, if we really nailed it, we might get a 100-person team for 18 months. So we sort of tuned our go-to-market more towards the larger teams, and in consulting that would drive much more significant revenue. I'm not sure there'll be as many 150-person teams needed with all these tools. I think they might be 30-person teams or 40-person teams, and you need, So that's one interesting piece. I think is sort of the size. The next one I'm not sure how to solve, which is, we looked at this kind of on a geographic basis with Nexient. We were very focused on US, and we felt sort of there is this market problem that if all IT got outsourced outside the US, then in 10 years, there wouldn't be anybody who had enough experience in the US to lead or manage IT, because you need to kind of come up and do the grunt work and then, grow your career that way. And so if you kind of clear out the bottom of the market, then there's no one left. I think AI might do a similar thing where people who are quite senior and quite talented can use AI tools to go much faster. But I don't know if there's as many entry-level jobs as there. Maybe there will be. I don't know. Maybe the really good entry-level people will learn how to use the tools.
Maybe that's what it is. It's training them to be an intermediate in 6 months.
Yeah, that could be. That would be awesome.
Accelerating that.
Yeah, because nobody really likes the grunt work entry level. Like, you're just doing it to try to figure the whole thing out and get to the more interesting work. So that would be awesome if that's where it landed.
I think for some of us, it was the making of us when we were in our 20s, right? But we weren't wanting to do it in our 30s. And I, anecdotally, what I'm seeing customers saying, I haven't really needed to replace anyone who's left through the efficiency we're getting in software development. But I'm always an optimist that we'll just be doing different things. I don't know what those things are, but when you think of the jobs, I was talking to one of my rugby referee colleagues who's a user experience person about AI at the weekend when we were at a rugby tournament. And I said, she sort of said, well, she'd be out of a job. And I said, well, look, 20 years ago, I don't think your job really existed in the volume that it does now.
Yeah.
She wasn't, she may have been born, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's one of those things. It didn't exist. And who knew what a prompt engineer was? Before a few years ago, even. And so those things are evolving. But I just see that there's a lot of stuff that we're not going to need to do.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And
so bring it on.
Yeah, I do think consulting generally is one of the most flexible professions. So it will, firms will change, focus will change, but I think that it'll happen rapidly, and the firms are quite good at that. Like one of the things that Accenture, at least when I was there, was so good at is they would reinvent themselves every 2 or 3 years. They were very conscious about constantly trying to figure out what the market will be doing in 2 years or 3 years. So if that's the kind of the approach, then that'll work out well, right? Because the market's changing, and none of us is really sure exactly how yet.
But that's the classical consulting thing about if consultants who get fired are the ones who don't actually go and tell you what you don't know. It's when you're when you're there telling them what they know, you're gone.
Yeah.
I knew that. I don't need you for that. But when you're creating, to put it like you said about from even a challenger sale perspective, when you're creating some insight about something and people are saying, well, hang on, I hadn't thought about it that way, and you're building out. I was always taught you want to be the bridge between creating a strategy and being able to actually show a company how you can exercise. You want to put a 300-person team to work. It's give them the vision, and they want it so much that they've got to, they actually get the funding and the approval to go down that track. So, I'm not talking about a $300 million SAP ledger. I'm talking about, what you can do with custom software that we see a lot of the time. It's that's what the art of consulting is. And I think classically it's, we've got a lot to take advantage of with AI.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
As opposed to thinking, what am I going to do next week? Because golf isn't attractive.
Yeah. So considering that customers are looking for, customers know that AI evolution and efficiency are to be had today and going into the future, how might you approach guaranteeing and delivering, market benefits to the customer, either contractually or how do you frame it in a way where a customer feels like they are achieving some of those benefits today, where either the scope is shorter, the cost, the personnel is might be fewer, the contingency is less, or any of these things. Of course, given the evolution of everything, you need to mitigate risks from a service provider perspective, but you also need to somehow tangibilize, right, the value that can that you can deliver today versus what that same type of deliverable might have cost, or would have been greater in scope or cost in the past. You have an idea of how you might.
You have a good example that maybe helps answer that, which is I'm involved with Provoke, and Andy Lynn is the CEO, is really driving it. But he and I 2-3 years ago were thinking about, he helped me grow Nexient, and he built most of the consulting side. And as he went in to run Provoke, I was asking him, when he joined, it sort of did what Nexient did roughly. And I said, Rick, I think that wave ended. So what wave are you going to be on? You need to find the next one, right? And so he and his team put a fair bit of work in and landed on agentic Gen AI a few years ago. And so they've been working on it for a while. So now they're in a position where they can do software development of various kinds. And part of your team are agents. So when you get a bid from them, what Nexient might have said, here's an 8-person team, and here's all the roles and what they're going to do. He might say the same thing, but 3 of the roles are an agent. And they have a name, and they're going to attend stand-up, but they're virtual. And because of that, they can actually work more, they can accomplish more, and your overall price will go down. And they also have done it in a way that there's sort of a platform that the company can bring in-house and put more of these agents to work. So to me, it's an interesting way to frame it, because it feels kind of like it fits in the normal buying motion. And so you think about going to finance, going to procurement, and some of these large organizations, you don't really want to look like something that is completely different to them. You kind of want to fit in.
Yeah.
And so this does that, but it also says it's not an 8-person team, it's a 4.5-person team that has got 3 agents, and you're going to get the same result or better. And the price is lower and the time might be shorter.
Wow.
Yeah. And specifically, what are the agents actually doing around, as part of that 8-person team?
So they can do, for example, test automation.
Yep.
They can do actually code scans, but they'll, rather than say, here are these 38 issues, this one will take you 4 hours to solve, good luck. They actually say, here's the code that we think solves that issue. And then a human being can just look at the code and say, yeah, and then check it in. So it's pretty fascinating.
Yes.
And they're getting really good traction with some pretty large US companies adopting it. And it's exciting to see. And I think that's a good example of how you kind of fit it all back into a model that we all understand, but it is quite different. But a lot of your questions, Andy, around like, how do you frame it? What are the risks? How do you, like all that can be taken care of that way, I think.
Very good.
So I'm really curious. You've been described as as the best listener, let's say. And I want to understand sort of where that came from. Was it some, for example, Stephen Covey, we follow Stephen Covey values, and one of those is understand before being understood. I don't know where the genesis for that came for you. Maybe it's just, part of your DNA. I don't know, but I like to, sort of understand is where that came from and how you believe that contributes to effective leadership and building strong relationships with clients and partners.
Yeah, I do think it's just in my DNA. I think I've sort of just, been like this my whole life, where I, for whatever reason, when I come into a new situation, I like to listen. I like to understand. And I do think it has helped me a lot in my career in leading people by deeply understanding what motivates them. And then maybe I also have worked a lot with software engineers in sort of a product management type role throughout my career. And I found pretty early on that they don't want you to tell them what to do. They want you to sort of lead them with whatever data convinced you. You should give it to them and convince them. And so I think I just apply that generally in dealing with people with large organizations is, if I believe we should do these 3 things, I must have some data and some sort of market view that led me to that. So I'm way better off sharing all of that. And the fun part is actually they don't always come to the exact same 3 things I did that we should do next. And sometimes they come up with a better one. So it's like having some trust, I think, as well, that the people that you've surrounded yourself with are really talented. And so listen, but then also share kind of the underlying data and try to lead them to the same conclusion. But don't necessarily be upset if they come up with a slightly different one, because half the time it's better. So, so for me, that's been...
You said that was part of your DNA, but I would imagine that it's also a function of sort of maturity and knowledge over time, that you're not necessarily having as much imposter syndrome, feeling like you need to be talking and telling, but you feel like, no, I get the most out of people if they're doing what they want to do, and I'm listening and guiding and not necessarily directing. Would that be true?
That's for sure. And at Nexium was the first time I was CEO, and you sort of have this, as you said, imposter syndrome is a great word for you. I sort of wonder, like, if I was making all the calls, is this going to go really well or really poorly? And you don't really know, like, until you get it a try. Sure. And the first 2.5 years, it wasn't good. You have to have a lot of sort of faith in yourself and faith in the, more like the sort of whatever you think are the first principles, like what is it that you're looking at? And as we've talked about earlier, building stuff that people love to use. At the end of the day, if it's making their life easier or letting them do something that they could not do before, they will ultimately pay you for that. Turns out it might take 3 years, but having confidence. So now that I've been lucky to have that experience, it's easier because I do have more confidence and more willing to rely on the way I've gotten here to keep going.
Great. Well, Thank you for joining us today, Mark. Your expertise in agile transformation, remote team leadership, and scaling software development organizations and processes was incredibly valuable. Thank you very much. And to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Software Without Borders. If you're interested in learning more about agile methodology, remote team optimization, or the latest trends in software development, please be sure to subscribe to our show and only leave a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting platform. Thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time.